The world has changed. It's changed already. As Jeremy said, Francis, I work on neglected tropical diseases. In Africa today, and almost from the beginning of time, the percentage of people infected with parasites is very, very high. 15 years ago, hardly a single person in Africa was being treated for any of these neglected tropical diseases. And that's where they got their name, because they were neglected. Today, because of big business, the pharmaceutical companies have all changed their attitudes. They now donate drugs which are very effective against these tropical parasites. And 400 million people in Africa every year are treated free of charge by the pharmaceutical industry and by neglected tropical disease NGOs through ministries of health and ministries of education. What the professor said in the introduction was that climate change can knock us back 50 years. Well, it only has to knock us back 15 years and we would be in a parlous state. I think this was actually part of the Lancet report of 6 years ago, when Jeffrey Sachs, who was partly responsible for the Millennium Development Goals, an economist from New York, made these points. And he said that the crisis is human-made, and it emerges from how and what we grow to eat, how we mobilize and distribute energy, how we transport ourselves and our freight, and how we build our buildings and lay out our cities. But only 6 years ago, talking about climate change, he never mentioned the impact on health. The United Nations Millennium Development Goals, on the other hand, are all about health, and they don't mention climate change. There hadn't been the link made between the two until very recently. Icebergs, of course, they're going to suffer, not necessarily from climate change, from global warming. And I want to emphasize that climate change is not the same as global warming. Often over the last few years, people who have poo-pooed the idea of climate change have said, but it's getting colder. It's climate change. It could go either way. But it's not only about the tip of the iceberg. And these are some of the points that I want to make that we've got to think about, and possibly some of you will think are more important than others. Desertification. Is Africa's desert going to increase and take over parts which currently we can live in? Will there be a raised sea level? If it is global warming, there will be a raised sea level, and what will the effect of that be? What will be the changes on wildlife? And I don't necessarily mean rhinoceroses and elephants. I mean the insect population, because they are at the bottom of the food chain. What about food production, and particularly if water, surface water, is going to disappear, what about the fish population upon which we're so dependent? Water shortages and the need for better sanitation. And then the huge problem that will develop from climate change is going to be, I believe, human migration. There was actually a set of documentaries made 5 or 6 years ago by a company called Rockhopper, and they looked at the possible effects of climate change and global warming in those days, and they examined the consequences. For instance, from Iceland to Nigeria to Bangladesh and to the Maldives, because if the seawater does go up, these films demonstrated by looking forward just how many life-threatening changes have already occurred and would occur. One of the films, which I recommend if you are interested in this subject, you go and look on the website and see, is called Hot Cities, because probably we forget that the dengue season in Jakarta this is 6 years ago, had been extended, hugely extended. And I wonder how many of you remember the number of deaths from heat in Paris. And probably you don't realize, but this film shows that Chicago is now going green with rooftop gardens. And the dengue situation is rocketing out of control. There are now almost every country in the world, except the very cold ones, have dengue epidemics every year. 20 years ago, dengue was only known in 3 countries. And everyone agrees now that we need to take action. But it's an amazing fact that despite the number of factories that are being built in China, the amount of power that we use both in the UK and Africa, in America, everybody says, oh, the poor should not use charcoal. The poor should not use certain stoves because they are polluting the atmosphere. One of the key things which I'm sure, if you do turn to think about it, you'll think about is fresh water. Is there going to be a reduction in quality and quantity of fresh water? Because that is going to be where the next wars are going to be fought over. And if there was a reduction in quality and quantity, what would happen about waterborne diseases? Would they increase or would they decrease? I'm not sure I know the answer to that. Rising temperatures could allow malaria to climb hills. In other words, mosquitoes, which are temperature dependent, would be able to spread much further. And other parasites, the ones I'm interested in, all have vectors, and the vectors themselves are temperature dependent. So insects will change, snails will change, rodents will come out of the habitat that they currently live in, and we never see them, to perhaps transfer their diseases into humans. There are going to be changes in the food production. And who's going to suffer? The people at the extremities. Where rainfall decreases, food production may well disappear. But on the other hand, in the milder areas of the world, food production capability may increase because productivity could increase with temperature. I'm not sure which way it's going to go, but it's going to change. So what are going to be these vulnerable areas? And I think I've already mentioned the Maldives and the smaller islands in the Pacific. They actually will disappear if the water level rises by a meter. And even the Nile Delta. So the public health consequences are also going to be horrendous, because what I also predict is we're going to have a lot of crowding caused by migration as people go to the cities. And unless we have sanitation, we're going to have a lot of problems. I don't know whether many of you remember the Commission for Africa, the Blair report, where he actually said, he was possibly one of the first to really highlight the problem in Africa, that climate change is a worry. Rains seem to be failing more frequently. Donor countries should make $100 million available for observations. And I just wonder how many countries have made $100 million available since then. So we've got optimism with some people and we've got extreme pessimism with others. We need to improve the quality of life by improving air quality. We need to improve water and sanitation. And we need better health education, all linked to this climate change. And the question really everybody's talking about is, will the rich countries heed the call, or is it already too late? So from my point of view, from the tropical diseases, I really do wonder what will be the effect. Will the vectors widen their territory, or will they suffer? Some will widen, some will suffer. Will waterborne diseases increase as water becomes warmer? Will we get these tropical waterborne diseases in the Thames? Then I don't need to fly to Africa to work. I can do my work here in London. Or will they shrink as rivers dry up? Will these diseases invade Europe? Actually, schistosomiasis has, for the first time this year, been found in Europe. It was in Corsica, admittedly, but it's getting warmer further north. Could mosquitoes breed faster and spread, bringing malaria and these other diseases back into Egypt, from which they've been eliminated, but then jump across to Europe? So is there a conclusion? And this, I think, has also come from the Lancet paper, that a global agreement, they say, to tackle climate change is needed, but doctors and scientists should have a crucial advisory role. We have to advocate for carbon constraint, but in the developed world, in my opinion, not just push all the onus onto the poor people in the developing countries. But the developing countries will develop, but they need to do it in a low carbon way. And the health consequences of climate change now have got to be linked and put together. So to be concise, the rich are going to find their life more expensive, it's going to be inconvenient, uncomfortable, disruptive, and colourless. And the poor are going to die.